So the eagle-eyed among you will have already noticed that I am not, of course, Francis Pang, as advertised in your agenda today. I was asked yesterday evening if I would mind stepping in, as Francis has been called away to what can best be described as a market access emergency. And this is probably the only venue I'll get away with saying that. So, but however, my presentation this morning is all about approaching market access and health technology assessment differently. And we believe that in order to gain market access in the orphan drug arena requires exquisite collaboration between these capabilities here. And in the spirit of this different approach, we have structured our team internally at Shire in this way to ensure that we bring the patient voice and the experience into the center of what we do. So let me introduce you to Shire. I'm sure you're already familiar with the company. We are based, most of us are based actually just north of here, a few minutes drive up on Lake Geneva. And these figures on the top are just some of, are just some of the facts and figures that make us who we are. But I'd like to focus on the bottom left-hand corner, the Shire Human Genetic Therapies, which is the division of Shire that I represent here today. Over the last 6 years, Shire HGT has grown from having one marketed product covering just 12 countries to 4 products covering nearly 50 countries right now, growing employment from 400 employees to 1,500 employees. And this year, for the first time, revenues will exceed $1 billion. So we're here to talk about orphan diseases and not Shire. So why are orphan diseases different? Well, there's many familiar faces in the audience today, and I think the majority of people here in this room will be familiar with why orphan drugs are different from conventional diseases, which occur more frequently. And we all face common challenges. In particular, there are challenges with the underdiagnosis or misdiagnosis of patients. Due to the nature of orphan diseases, clinical trials are difficult to conduct. The pricing reflects the high investment required and the level of risk inherent in that investment. Yet payers need to face the opportunity cost problem of distributing very scarce financial resources. And so to the environment where we find ourselves working today. And there is plenty of good news. The EU orphan drug legislation was introduced in 2000, designed to stimulate the development of orphan drugs through financial incentives and support in terms of scientific evidence. It recently celebrated its 10-year anniversary and has been a success with over 600 medicines receiving orphan drug designation and over 60 medicines approved in total. But there's always a but. But there are few concessions for pricing and reimbursement. And you'll all be familiar with the Eurotas survey that took place in 2006 and was reported in 2007, looking at the variability and access that exists across Europe. Bearing in mind this was before the National Rare Disease Plan has been put into place. But this variability exists because of different pricing and reimbursement procedures in different countries, including health technology assessments that are used to evaluate the clinical and cost effectiveness of these medicines. And in recognition of the gap that exists, the EU engaged in several initiatives that are specific to orphan diseases. The findings of the EU High-Level Pharmaceutical Forum focused on 4 key areas: earlier dialogue, knowledge, awareness, and enhancing expertise. And just to focus on 1 or 2 of these areas briefly, I'm looking at earlier dialogue. So this schematic represents the life cycle for an orphan drug, a schematic that I'm sure is very familiar. It takes on average 10 years to reach the point of regulatory approval. However, that's not the end of the journey for orphan drugs. Orphan drugs still need to go through pricing and reimbursement procedures before patients have access to therapies. And currently there exists an early dialogue between the companies and the regulatory agencies. But the proposal is to extend this part here, this dialogue, to include scientific advice on the health, economic, and quality of life data to collect within trials to meet the needs of pricing and reimbursement bodies. In 2009, DG Sanko, with the European Commission, kicked off a project on the clinical added value of orphan drugs, known commonly to us as CAVOD, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that over the next few days. As you might appreciate, the longest part of the HTA process is the systematic review of the evidence for a product. What CAVOD proposes is the provision of a dossier assembled by a working party sitting within the European Medicines Agency to the member states to accelerate their pricing and reimbursement procedures, which means, or which should mean, expedited decision-making. And at a European level, we're all familiar with the many, many pieces of the jigsaw that are being worked on currently in order to address this issue. However, we believe that the rate-limiting step centers on conventional health technology assessment applications to orphan diseases. What the scientific evidence will do is generate data, and what CAVOD will do is accelerate pricing and reimbursement procedures. They're both designed to facilitate access, but will not in themselves increase or expand the number of patients receiving access, which means that the current health technology assessment methodology needs to be adapted for orphan drugs. And it's like a Volkswagen Beetle car, for any car fans out there. Adding a huge spoiler to the back of the car and a big exhaust will not make the car win the Monaco Grand Prix. What is needed is a change to the engine. So just taking a look at conventional health technology assessment. HTA for conventional medicines is focused on two aspects: cost effectiveness and budget impact. Cost effectiveness is about whether the additional clinical benefits are worth paying for, whereas the budget impact is about the financial impact of the provision of a drug for a population of patients. And in practice, and as a consequence, the rigid application of HTA methodologies has led to a high proportion of negative or restricted reimbursement decisions, as highlighted here by the SMC and the CVZ in the Netherlands. And this data was taken from Wecker in 2010. So why doesn't conventional HTA methodology fit for rare diseases? Well, our conclusion, based on what we've just shown and a whole host of other information, is that it is unfair to apply conventional health technology assessment methodology to rare diseases, as it leads to inequitable access to orphan drugs for patients with rare diseases. The scope is too narrow to demonstrate the full potential of orphan drugs, and many of you in the audience are nodding and will have had that experience. The overall weight of evidence is not the same for conventional diseases, and the rarity poses unique challenges for evidence generation. Let me give you an example. Within Shire's intrathecal ERT program, which is an innovative and groundbreaking way of delivering enzyme replacement therapy into the brain, we are trying to work out with the regulators and the scientists what the endpoints should be. For example, levels of cognitive function. Health technology assessment does not sufficiently recognize rarity, the seriousness of the condition, the availability of alternative therapies, innovation, or the burden on the patient or on society. And as a consequence, orphan drugs are likely to exceed any economic threshold applied to decision-making on conventional drugs. Example, cost per quality. And let me give you one example from one of our development programs for Elaprase. There are significant challenges with health economic modeling for orphan drugs. For example, with Elaprase for Hunter syndrome, the trials collected 6-minute walk test data and forced expiratory volume data, which you will be familiar with as a respiratory measure. For the purposes of the health economic calculation, we needed survival data as well. So we had to borrow on the relationship between the 6-minute walk test and the pulmonary function and survival from another disease area such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease using the Bode scoring. And this poses problems and issues in itself in that COPD patients, it's an elderly population. They're fully grown adults, significantly older and lighter than children with Hunter syndrome. But this was the best analog we could find for use in this particular exercise. And we believe that this will be an issue with rare disease studies in that trials tend to be short in duration, example 6 months, but many are less, and unlikely to incorporate the very hard clinical outcomes, such as survival, that are required. So the question then becomes, how can we have a fairer evaluation of orphan drugs? And I know we're going to hear some presentations later today and tomorrow which will provide some alternatives on this. But we are suggesting a number of guiding principles that we believe are the right principles to follow when answering this question. We believe we need a fit-for-purpose, 21st century way of dealing with and evaluating orphan drugs. First of all, a broader set of considerations over and above cost-effectiveness alone. Secondly, the views of the patients, the family, the caregivers need to be formally incorporated into this mix. Thirdly, there should be flexibility in the evidence requirements for the health technology assessment. Setting the expectations the same as for conventional diseases is unfair and frankly unrealistic. And finally, the proportionality of the assessment has to be in relation to the magnitude of the decision being made and not to go overboard. We could potentially spend more on evidence generation than we're likely to see a return on the drug itself. And a good example of the application of these principles is the AGNSS process, which Josie Godfrey in the following presentation will describe in more detail. This represents a holistic approach to the evaluation of ultra-orphan drugs, and Shire was proud to be selected as a partner for this process. The UK Department of Health tasked AGNSS, rather than NICE, with health technology assessments for very rare diseases, signaling that it is not possible to apply a single decision framework for all drugs. And what is significant about this model is that the patient need is at the center of the process. Cost effectiveness is one consideration, but not the only consideration. The needs of the patient and society are reflected, as is the need to stimulate research and innovation. And while pricing and reimbursement bodies can be working on changing their HTA procedures, companies have a responsibility and can also play their part in demonstrating value. One example of how we do this is through patient registries, and we use an example from Hunter disease here, which is used to collect valuable data for HTA assessment in addition to safety follow-up. And we could also take a pragmatic listening approach to data collection as well. The HS Focus, Hunter Syndrome Focus Questionnaire, represents a means of gathering patient-reported outcomes. And this example shows how we approach the gathering of these outcomes, looking here at health-related quality of life in children with Hunter syndrome. So coming to my last one or two slides, the question then becomes, what does the future hold, or what do we believe the future looks like? And the key word here is collaboration. So we believe that collaboration is the key to success. And this schematic represents the stakeholders that we work with, engage with internally, externally, across borders, across geographies, across political divides. Shire is committed to taking a collaborative approach to improving patient access to orphan drugs. We believe that companies need to invest in demonstrating the value of orphan drugs as they do for conventional drugs. Education is needed with health technology assessment assessors regarding the challenges in the generation and interpretation of orphan drug evidence. health technology assessment organizations need to consider other mechanisms for evaluating orphan drugs, including a framework for containing factors outside the QALY, which we know and love so well. And there is a need to work together on a wider scope to identify the value and patient benefits of innovative health technologies. Thank you very much for your time.